So what about the autopsy? Now, that's really for an assassination investigation or any murder investigation, that's probably the single most important set of evidence that you have. Not always, but typically that's the case. Now, the doctors who performed the autopsy, there were 3 doctors responsible for the autopsy. I took their depositions under oath in the National Archives. This was the first time that they had had a systematic deposition taken, so there's a legal inquiry, there's a court stenographer there. The original autopsy material is in front of them. This is the first time they have ever seen the original autopsy material in terms of the face sheet, the record. Since the time of the assassination, it was the first time they had ever seen the autopsy photos. So they were present when the photos were taken, but they had not been shown the photos before. The doctors who performed the autopsy believed and claimed that President Kennedy had been shot from behind, and the version that the doctors in Bethesda Hospital gave was exactly the same as the Warren Commission supported the Warren Commission. There are a few little problems here that we need to ask some questions about, and there are more than a few, but I'll just mention 2 of them. When I took the deposition of Dr. Humes under oath, I went through the record fairly systematically with him, and we finally got to the question of the original autopsy. So there's a version of the autopsy that is in the National Archives, handwritten. He had very good handwriting. I envied his handwriting. So he has this original version of the autopsy. I asked him a series of questions because I had some suspicions, and he admitted under oath for the first time that the version that is in the National Archives, the original version, was not the original version. He had written another one beforehand, and he had burned the original version. He never told the Warren Commission. He had never told the American public that. He admitted that under oath. I said, "Why did you burn it?" I did not think for a minute I would get a correct answer, but he said the president's blood was on it, and I thought it was gruesome. And I asked him, I already asked him, but I reminded him that he said that he wrote the autopsy while he was at home sitting in front of his fireplace. So I said, "Was there president's blood in your home?" Knowing that it couldn't possibly be. And then he acknowledged that that could not have been the reason, but he could not remember why he had burned the original version and said nothing to anybody about that. The autopsy photos that are in the National Archives do not show a large, massive exit wound in the occipital parietal area. See, I can't say it without touching the back of my head. I've tried and I can't do it. There's no massive wound in the occipital parietal area that's visible on the photos. So one of the questions is, were these photos doctored? Are the photos accurate? Are the doctors in Parkland Hospital correct or incorrect? So all of these questions came up. We were able, the agency that I worked for, we were able to find the person who developed the original autopsy photo. So her names were on the records, and we found her. Her name was Sandra Spencer. So we located her, and we brought her to Washington. So what she did was she developed the films. So these were slides. There were black and white slides and color slides. These are large format, so large print. So these are not your 35 millimeter prints, but these are large prints. So she develops the color transparencies, black and white transparencies, and then she printed from the transparencies onto Kodak paper. I asked her if she had any prints that she had made at the same time that she developed the autopsy photos and printed the autopsy photos, and she said yes, because she did the developing work for the White House, and she had pictures of President Kennedy that had been taken a couple of days earlier that she kept as a souvenir. So I said, bring those with you, because in theory, the paper that is in the National Archives that the photographs are printed on should be exactly the same as what she had. So she came to the National Archives, she looked at the autopsy photos, the color transparencies, the black and white transparencies, and she said, these are not the photographs that I developed myself. And I said, well, could you describe what is different about these? And she said, yes. She said that the photographs that she developed had a large massive exit wound in the back of the head. So what she said she developed was exactly the same as what the doctors in Parkland Hospital had seen, consistent once again with a shot from the front, not from behind. We then compared the paper of the photographs that she had developed, and the paper in the National Archives is not the paper, the Kodak. Sorry about that mistake. Not the Kodak paper that she had. And she said, these are not the ones that I did. She said, I don't know where they came from, but these are not mine. So I asked her if she had had any experience with autopsies before. I thought, presumably she had not, and she may not know what she's been seeing. We wanted to do comprehensive, not jump to conclusions. And so I was expecting her to say no, she'd done photographs of President Kennedy, but not autopsy. And she said, oh yes, before I went to work at the Naval Lab in Anacostia, I was an autopsy photographer myself. And so she was very familiar with that. So we have a few questions there. Now, none of this says that we know what the answers to those questions are, but we do have some questions with this.
You mentioned that the person who took the photographs that you interviewed and the photographs that
who developed
the photographs. Did you ever find, or were you ever able to find, the photographs that she developed?
No. No, we pursued this. Here's one of the questions. So there's no massive headwind. We got the original photographs, those that are in the archives. Through the good graces of Kodak, we went to Rochester, New York. That was one time I felt very special. I was whisked through all the security in airports and taken on separate vans. I thought I was a VIP. We went on the plane first, and we have FBI agents there who are guarding the autopsy photos. We digitized them. We did not. Kodak did. Blew them up so we could look at these images, and by my non-expert eye, the photographs have not been doctored, retouched. But the question ends up being when those photographs were taken. And two possibilities. One is before the autopsy, which is what all of the official records say, is the photographs were taken before the autopsy began, or after the autopsy, after the body had been reconstructed. So Gawler's mortuary reconstructed the body. Observers, and this is in William Manchester, this is the first time I read about it, William Manchester's Death of a President, that said that the body was so well done you could not tell that he had been shot. So very good reconstruction at the mortuary. Were the photos taken afterwards, and so that after this wound is covered up? Knowing that this is a possibility, when I interviewed the doctors, I asked them, was the body cleaned in any way before the photographs were taken? And they all said no. They described it as being very messy, brain tissue, blood, matted. When you look at the photographs of the back of the head, it's all clean and neatly combed. So before or afterwards, and I can't prove any of this, but for me, the frustrating thing is the Warren Commission could have done this, and the Warren Commission did not do it. 30 years later, you can wonder about this, but you can't really get that. But conceivably, Sandra Spencer developed photographs from the autopsy, or from the photographs taken before the autopsy, and not those that are taken later, and she sees the ones taken later in the National Archives. Now, the evidence seems to point in that direction, but that's also a fair amount of speculation. I can't say I'm really confident that happened, but I suspect that happened, and it would be nice to know, but I'm not expecting to find out. If sometime we end up finding additional autopsy photographs that show that, then we will maybe know the ones that Sandra Spencer developed. She has since died. The autopsy that was performed in Bethesda Naval Hospital was a disgrace. I mean, it was a disgrace. When I took the deposition, I asked Dr. Humes what the standard was that he used for the autopsy. And he said, oh, there was some manual that had been created by the Navy that set up the standards. And I said, is that the one that you followed? And he said, yes. And I then pulled out a copy of it, which I had, and handed it. And I said, is this the one that you followed? And he didn't say anything. Or he said, yeah, he answered yes to that. But I could tell, I mean, from my perspective, he thought this is going to be a very bad day. And we then went through this, and he just simply didn't follow the procedures. Some people will say that the Warren Commission is involved in this conspiracy. Some people will say the Warren Commission simply was incompetent. One of the conclusions that I reach, and this is where I will end, is although I do not myself believe that the Warren Commission was consciously involved in an attempt to suppress the truth about the assassination, again, personal point of view, I believe that they did a profound disservice to the American people, that they did not conduct a serious, comprehensive, conscientious investigation of the assassination, which they could have done in 1964, and I couldn't do in 1994. So they did not do it. They created what I think was a prosecutor's brief against Oswald. Any evidence they could find that was incriminatory against Oswald, they would include. Things that were exculpatory, they left out of the report. So they did a profound disservice and led to, I think, giving life to many of the conspiracy theories. I don't know who killed President Kennedy. I think there is no, if we differentiated between circumstantial evidence, sort of some background, who's in which place at which time, we differentiate between circumstantial evidence and direct evidence, saying, I saw someone pick up the rifle and shoot. If we differentiate between those, there's no direct evidence on anybody for the Kennedy assassination. It's a circumstantial case. And whether you believe it that it was Castro or anti-Castro or mafia or CIA, you have to make your case based on circumstantial evidence. And that's not shocking or new or immoral. That's what legal cases often are. When you don't have direct evidence, you have to put the circumstances together and try and find the most plausible explanation. If we actually ask the question, was Oswald guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, assuming that we apply legal standards at the time, suppose that Oswald had lived, the judge had applied evidentiary rules appropriately, that he had instructed the jury, maybe the judge was a she, that's possible. No, Dallas, no. If he made those decisions, instructed the jury correctly, and the jury made a correct decision, not based on emotion but the evidence, I am convinced that Oswald would have been found not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. To me, there's just no question he is not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That doesn't mean he didn't do it, but it means that the evidence was not there. Key pieces of evidence were, in legal terms, their chain of custody had been lost. So somebody says, somebody gave it to me, and that person says, I didn't give it to him. And their just chain of custody is a serious problem throughout the entire Kennedy assassination, whether it's the Mannlicher Carcano, whether it's the ballistics and others. So the evidence is not there. And so you can have a circumstantial case, and there is some inculpatory evidence, some pretty good evidence that Oswald knew something was going on. Immediately after the assassination, he learns the president's killed. He doesn't sit around Dealey Plaza looking and trying to find people. He tries to get out there. He immediately goes home, and he gets a gun. Now, that's not, if I heard of somebody being assassinated, that would not be my reaction. So I assume, and there are many other things, that he knew about something that was going on. Now, maybe he knew that he had just killed the president, or maybe he thought somebody asked him to be in the lunchroom during the time of the assassination, and he realized he was going to be framed for it, so he's going to protect his life. But he knew something was going on. There is something there. He's not completely innocent. That is, completely innocent of knowing something that's going on. I can't see any plausible explanation for that. So even with the circumstantial case, it's not sufficient to convince Oswald. But if you say, against whom else is there a circumstantial case, there isn't anybody. for whom you have even a plausible circumstantial case. So you can say, well, CIA, or maybe there's some marksman. You don't have them there in Dallas with people seeing it. So you go from a very significant amount of evidence in a circumstantial case against Oswald, but not enough to convict him, but nothing against any other person. So, I don't know, 40% Oswald did it, 60% someone else, and who knows who that was, and I can't even name one person with 1% plausibility. One of the fascinating parts of the story is what happened in Mexico City. So 7 weeks before the assassination, I'll put in quotation marks, Oswald goes to Mexico City. The CIA has staked out both the Cuban and the Soviet embassies, as well as maybe some other embassies there that will just maybe other embassies, but at least those two, because those have been declassified now. And the CIA has both tapped the telephones, not all of the telephones there, and there's sometimes misleading statements about that, but they had tapped some of the telephones to the Cuban and Soviet embassy, not all of them, and they also had photo surveillance. So in theory, anyone going in or out of the embassy would be, someone going into the embassy would be photographed, probably the back of the head. Coming out of the embassy, they would get the photograph from the front of the head, or from the face. So Oswald, I think, went in or out of the Cuban and Soviet embassies 7 times, I think. Don't quote me on that. I think about 7 times. So in theory, the CIA would have 14 photographs of Oswald, 7 of his back and 7 of his front. Or if it's 5, then 10. You get the idea. After the assassination, CIA was aware that there was somebody claiming to be Oswald going to the Soviet and Cuban embassies, and I'll say something else about that. And so CIA was asked to send photograph of Oswald after the assassination. I talked with the woman who sent the photograph. Her name is Ann Goodpasture. She also has passed away since this time, and she said she was very opposed to sending this photograph because she said she didn't know whether it was Oswald or not in the photograph. If you look at the photograph, it looks to me like what I would say a Ukrainian sailor, nothing that looks anything like Oswald. So there should have been, in theory, 14. One of the things I wanted to find out was what was going on with the photo surveillance. So I got all of the original records from photo surveillance to see what is going on. CIA had said, well, it wasn't working during the part of the time that Oswald was there. So I looked at their monthly report, and in October, as I'm recalling, something like October 30th, this is before the assassination, they filed their monthly report with headquarters. They didn't say anything about photo surveillance not working. It was only after the assassination that they said it wasn't working, a story that I found not to be entirely credible. There's also the very curious story of the taping of Oswald. So there's a CIA again has conducting wiretaps, and what CIA would do, and this is Ann Goodpasture again became the source of this, CIA would have the large reel-to-reel tapes where they would record all conversations going in and out of the Soviet and Cuban embassies on those lines that they had tapped. Then they would go back and listen to them, and anything, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself there. So they're conducting this. After the assassination, the CIA is asked, please let us hear these tape recordings of Oswald calling the Soviet embassy. And the CIA said those tapes had been routinely erased. So we don't have them. We don't have them. So we don't know if it's Oswald's voice or this person. So we don't have the tapes anymore. Well, on November 23rd, 1963, the day after the assassination, we do have this recording of President Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover, whom Johnson called Edgar. So there's this recording, and Johnson says, what is this business about Oswald in Mexico City? And Hoover says, that's something we don't understand. We have up here the tape, and it's not Oswald's voice. So this tape existed after the assassination, not routinely erased. So I asked Ann Goodpasture about this, what about this tape? And she said, oh yes, the reel-to-reel tapes were erased, but when we found something of operational interest, then we'd make one of those small tapes. And she said she had that tape in her hand. She gave it to the CIA chief of station, Wynne Scott, and he then took it. She didn't know what happened with it after that point. So now think about this. Heavy surveillance of the Soviet and Cuban embassy. A guy goes down there claiming to be Oswald, goes in and out several times. They don't have any photographs of it. They have a tape recording of this person who claims to be Oswald, but then they lose the tape recording, and J. Edgar Hoover says it's not Oswald's voice. All of this suggesting to, I think, any reasonable interpretation, at least the possibility, someone is imitating Oswald in Mexico City, and CIA may not know that somebody is impersonating Oswald. They may not know that, but they have this information. After the assassination, if it turns out you now have this lone nut, this crazy gunman, this Marxist, is going in and out of the Soviet and Cuban embassies under CIA surveillance, and he's including meeting with Kostakov, the head of assassinations, as I mentioned, CIA looks pretty inept that they didn't do something about this, so an attempt to suppress this, not because they were involved in the assassination, but because Oswald went through their security net, which is designed to catch things like this, and they utterly failed to do that. The story is even more involved than that, but you have both photo surveillance and electronic surveillance. Oswald should have been on it. There's no evidence that, in fact, the Lee Harvey Oswald accused of assassinating the president was the person who was picked up by CIA. So what does the Zapruder film show? It's very controversial what it shows and what it doesn't show. Some will even claim that the Zapruder film has been doctored and we're not seeing the original of that. But what does the Zapruder film show? I've spoken with people who, as I'm watching the film with them, and they'll say, see, there, that's when it happened. And I look at it and I don't see what they're talking about. When Kennedy is first hit, when Governor Connolly is first hit, there are many different interpretations. When was Kennedy first hit? When was Connolly first hit? Now, for frame 313, there's no question that was the fatal shot. But in terms of other shots or what it means, was there more than one shooter or not, very controversial. There's one thing that is not controversial in the Zapruder film, and that is after President Kennedy is hit in frame 313, his body goes immediately back and to the left. So that's not controversial. After he is shot, he goes back and to the left. Now, if we're thinking about our simple way of thinking about things, and I'm very simple, so this is how I do think about things, that would seem to be consistent with a shot from the front. So it comes and hits, and it will continue to go in the same direction. Now, that does not necessarily mean that it happened, and I'm saying that this is the simple way of thinking of it, but Kennedy's body going back and to the left would be, at least in a reasonably simple way, that would be consistent with a shot from the front. If you were thinking that Kennedy had been shot from behind, presumably his body would go toward the front. So we've got the Zapruder film. We see something very clearly in this. But what was the American public told in 1963 about what the Zapruder film showed with regard to the direction of President Kennedy's body after the shooting? So we know, because we can watch the film, that his body goes back and to the left. The first description of the film that was made from November of 1963 by a young cub reporter. You may have heard of him, named Dan Rather. So he happens to be in Dallas, and he sees the Zapruder film. And he describes the Zapruder film with remarkable accuracy. I couldn't believe it when I first heard his description, including describing the expression on Jackie Kennedy's face. I don't know how he was able to do that. If I had had the frames just in front of me and looking at them individually, I couldn't have done a better description than did Dan Rather, with one exception. And he describes President Kennedy's body after being hit as going forward. So Dan Rather, who has seen the film, very accurate description, except for on this one point. Okay, so that's one. Now people can make mistakes. I make mistakes. I assume some of you make mistakes, so maybe Dan Rather made a mistake, got some things right and some things incorrect. Here's one I have a little bit more difficulty accounting for. Remember, Life magazine owns the original Zapruder film. And on December 6th, 1963, I have a photocopy of the article here, Life magazine wants to talk about what happened in Dealey Plaza. And Life magazine says there are already starting to be conspiracy theories about President Kennedy being shot from the front. And Life magazine in this article says, well, yes, we understand the Dallas doctors did think that President Kennedy was shot from the front. And they said, we at Life magazine didn't understand how could Kennedy have been shot from the front, as the Dallas doctors thought, if Oswald's behind? So this is a good question. So Life magazine went to look at the film itself to see what actually happened. And so from Life magazine, remember, they have the original film. The American public does not have it. It says, it has been hard to understand how the bullet could enter the front of his throat if Oswald is behind. Hence the recurring guess that there was a second sniper somewhere else. That is the grassy knoll behind the picket fence. But the 8mm film shows the president turning his body far around to the right as he waves to someone in the crowd. His throat is exposed toward the sniper's nest just before he clutches it. So we, Life magazine, we have the only original record of the assassination. President Kennedy turned around, and when he turned around, that's when he was shot. So if you read Life magazine, if you believe that reporters are telling the truth, that they have observed this record, which they have, I think that makes sense. Well, in 1969, when the film was first able to be seen by the public, this is again in the Garrison trial, it turns out President Kennedy never turned around to look behind. So how do you account for this now? Dan Rather, very accurate description, except for this one thing on the question of which direction the shot comes from. Life magazine has the film. They understand the issue exactly. Was Kennedy shot from the front? And they either make an extraordinarily stupid mistake or they lie about this so the American public knows. In 1964, some of the frames of the Zapruder film are included in the Warren Commission report. On the question of the direction that the president's body went after the shooting, the Warren Commission report inverted the frames so it looked as though his body went forward rather than back. So the frames were inverted. So you're a conscientious person, you're reading the news, you're trusting in the Warren Commission, you're trusting in Dan Rather. Everybody trusts Dan Rather, right? I think I'm right about that. You trust Life magazine, and we've got this rather consistent set of mistakes on exactly the same issue, on exactly the important issue in the Kennedy assassination. Was there a shooter from the front? When it was after the film became available publicly, the Warren Commission was asked, or former members of the Warren Commission were asked about this. The FBI ended up reporting that it was an inadvertent printer's error, that the order of the films were switched. So that's our Zapruder film. Raises some questions about this. Now, with the information that I'm giving you now, that doesn't necessarily prove anything, but it certainly does suggest that people were certainly aware of what the issue was President Kennedy shot from the front, and all of the official information going to the American public is attempting to deny that, even when there is information showing that that was not the case.